Well, the temperatures dipped a little this morning thanks to the rains that fell in Abuja, the Federal Capital Territory. It's 26 degrees this morning. Good morning and welcome to Sunrise Daily. Yes, we're your daily dose of sunshine. I'm Maupe Ogun Yusuf.
Indeed, good morning and welcome. I'm Kayla Megwa, and yes, the nation's capital is filled with trees that are on the floor. I think
trees on the floor.
Yes,
like
most of it. You know, it was a little scary. I think many people who live in the nation's capital are very conscious of having trees around them and having shrubs. We're those kinds of people. But I think with the rains here now, we do have to start cutting them down, so they don't affect light poles, so they don't affect power installations, you know. And then when you're parking your car now, you have to be a little bit more careful so you don't get any damages when these heavy rains come and the trees are bending all the way backwards.
Indeed, but everyone is happy to see the rain.
Oh, yes,
that I can tell you. Well, not just the rains, we're also taking you to Adamawa, Adamawa in the northeastern region of Nigeria, where we're going to be showing you the Mahmoud Ribadu Square. Yeah, the square was recently reinvigorated, recently refurbished and renovated. It's named after the first Minister of Defense in this republic, in the First Republic, Mahmoud Ribadu. And there's so much to tell you about this square. I'm hoping that we can see it sooner rather than later, because it does appear that we're showing you all the greenery.
We're showing the whole of Yola.
but this is what I was told, and you can see it is labeled there, Mahmoud Ribadu Square. But that's a little bit of history we're bringing to you about who the square is named after. I think that square is supposed to be like the Eagle Square equivalent for the people of Adamawa State.
Yes, and then aptly named after Nigeria's very first Minister of Defense after independence, son of a district head from Adamawa, so he is from there, you know. And, a very, very important piece of history for the people of Yola. Yola in itself, as you can see from our skyline, is very beautiful. It's a very nice place. You know, I have so many wonderful memories of Yola in Adamawa State. The square, by the way, is in Jimeta itself, you know. But you see, the people of Yola, we say good morning to you this morning. And if you can identify, and that's what Ayo likes to say, if you can identify where you are in this picture, that would be really nice. But very serene atmosphere. Of course, has had its challenges in the past few years, but ultimately a very resilient people, And everyone is calling on these community efforts, especially in places like Yola, where there are lots of vigilantes, where there are people who stand up for themselves, who fight against these people who are enemies of our country. So our prayers are with you in Adamawa State, and we hope that all things work out better for you in the years to come.
Oh, eventually I did get to see the square. You can see it right smack.
Oh, there it is.
Well, that's where it is. Oh well. Well, talking about prayers being with people this morning, I think that a number of people will be saying prayers with the Labour Party as well, because in recent times it does appear that there has been great uncertainty surrounding the leadership of the party. Do not forget that just a few days ago, the Supreme Court ruled saying that Julius Abure should not have been named by the appeal court as the chairman of the Labour Party, that leadership matters continue to remain the internal affairs of political parties. Well, Mr. Abure decided to hold on to that and say, well, if that is what the Supreme Court is saying, then he insists that he is the chairman of the Labour Party. But not so for the presidential candidate of the Labour Party in the 2023 elections, and also elected officials on the platform of the Labour Party, who held a National Executive Council meeting yesterday by the person, convened and led by the person whom they consider their own chairman, Mrs. Nanadi Usman, who was at that meeting yesterday. So they held their National Executive Council meeting, and when they were done, they marched on to the office of the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, to submit to them and impress upon them the judgment of the Supreme Court, allowing parties to decide who the leaders are. And they say that Mrs. Nanadi Usman is the legitimate chairman of the Labour Party, not Mr. Julius Abure, that the elections which brought forth Mr. Julius Abure were illegal. Or Mr. Julius Abure was not having any of that. I mean, he also held his own meeting, insisting that he is still very much in charge. But this was how it went down at the meeting of the Labour Party held here in Abuja.
Following the Supreme Court judgment on the 4th of April 2025, the Nenadi Usman-led caretaker committee of the Labour Party is holding its National Executive Committee meeting in Abuja. Present here is the 2023 presidential and vice presidential candidates of the party, the governor of Abia State, Alex Oti, members of the National Assembly, former governorship candidates of the party, and other members of the executive committee. Mr. Peter Obi and Dati Baba Ahmed comment on the state of the nation.
Nigeria is collapsing. Anybody can say anything. The numbers are clear. The indices are clear. Very clear. More and more people are poorer. If you want, go to your village. The people who are begging now are no longer, there are even people who are that are no longer people who used to feed and are begging.
There used to be a party, a mammoth, that said it was going to misrule Nigeria for 60 years. Today, that party is not only a department, it is a detachment of another party. What happened, of course, they switched off IREV, they changed the meaning of English language, and they bent our constitution. And I remain by what I said. This serving government remains questionably constitutional.
The caretaker committee chairman is extending an olive branch to all party members following the judgment of the Supreme Court.
I therefore call on all party members, whether aggrieved by the decision of the Supreme Court or not, to set aside their grievances and ambitions and come join us to build a party that will stand with the ordinary Nigerian, and a party that would ensure that the gains of democracy are available to every Nigerian.
In his remarks, the governor of Abia State says he exhausted all avenues to resolve the issues in the party before the Supreme Court judgment.
I had sat with Mr. Bure last year, and I asked him, I said, what do you really want? And he said he didn't want anything. I said, okay, I can speak to my leaders, and you can become a BOT chairman. I offered that with their approval. But I also gave him some pieces of advice. I said, if I were you, I wouldn't want to lead people who wouldn't want me to lead them.
The INEC then resolves to take the certified true copy of the Supreme Court judgments to the headquarters of the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC. As the leadership of the party and members arrive at the commission's headquarters, there is an initial resistance, but they are eventually allowed in. Mr. Oti explains to the senior management of the electoral body why they have come, and INEC immediately give their response.
It's instructive to know that in your website, you have Julius Abure, the chairman of the party, but you do have a clock here that says by court order. Since there is another court order, we call on you to remove his name and replace with distinguished Senator Esther Menandi Osman.
The chairman of the commission is done here is away on official duty. And as soon as we leave here, we will communicate with him. We will meet and take decisions on this matter.
It is expected that in the coming days, INEC will reveal who it recognizes as the chairman of the party. Dili Omoyeni, Channels Television News.
So you heard the most of the meet there. I mean, the National Executive Council of the party meeting as a Labour Party meeting. And then, I mean, of course, a number of things were said there, but you also heard big issues raised around the leadership, and you've also heard, you've also seen how the members who held the meeting went to INEC's office, and clearly the ball is now squarely in the court of INEC, Kayla.
I mean, indeed, when it comes to the Labour Party, in fact, there's an addition to this story, which is the fact that Mr. Papa is also laying claims to the leadership of the party.
We heard that yesterday.
Just a few hours ago, you know. So we have a three-pronged situation going on with the Labour Party, which is quite disappointing. And I think they need to understand what the Supreme Court is trying to say here. These are internal party issues. you should be able to put your house in order. It's one of the biggest problems we have with political parties in Nigeria, especially when they're in the opposition. To be a viable opposition, you have to have your house in order. How do we have all the parties come together and actually have a Labour Party that can vie for position against the ruling All Progressives Congress in 2027? Will these things be sorted out by then? It's very important that they put their house in order, not just for wrestling power, but for holding government accountable, which is what opposition does. It is one of the most important tenets of democracy. That check on the ruling party, that check on the government in power. I mean, I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know how this is going to pan out. I heard something pretty sad there. Why would you want to rule people who don't want to rule you? And this crisis has been going on for a very long time. I remember when Kenneth Okonkwo was here on Sunrise Daily, where he said, it is the Nenadi Usman faction that we recognize. Julius Abure has had issues with the Labour Party as well, with the Nigerian Labour Congress. Remember when they were shutting down the NLC, the Labour Party offices across the country? And then, of course, there's this Mr. Papa situation. We can't pretend that that's not happening.
Well, you know that
this has to be sorted out as soon as possible to get the Labour Party. Remember the kind of momentum they were carrying in 2023. It's not just about getting power. It's about holding the ruling party and the government in power to account.
Indeed, Kayla. And I think that in the coming days, we'll get to see, I mean, with the ball now squarely within the court of INEC and the leadership, because clearly you can see that, I mean, anybody elected on the platform of the Labour Party excuse me, was at that National Executive Council meeting. So the question will then remain as to who precisely is the Julius Abure faction leading, or who precisely will the Apapa faction, you know, say that they're leading as well. There are big questions around there. And can you really lead people who do not want to be led by you? That's the question that Mr. Julius Abure has to answer. Or, you know, who precisely will now make up the Labour Party that he's leading? Big questions around there. But let's go to break now. We'll be back shortly to bring you our main interview of the day. And it's an interview that you certainly would not want to miss. Please stay with us. Just 3 days ago, the special agri-processing zones were launched finally. I mean, after years of planning, after years of meeting, they were finally launched in Kaduna State. The first in the first phase of 8 states that would eventually see the investment of the AfDB. They're pouring in over $200 million into the country to ensure that this special agri-processing zones work. Well, it's, as I did say, it's the product of a very long journey. And just yesterday, a member of this team who has been away for quite a while, monitoring what is happening across the special agri-processing zones, had a sit-down with the president of the AfDB, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, to talk about some of his achievements, especially as his tenure at the African Development Bank is beginning to come to an end. He started by talking about those who supported him to be where he was, how he got there, the journey there, and some of the achievements, what he set out to do there, and some of the achievements that have now been made a success in his tenure as the president of the AfDB. This is the interview that our colleague Ayo Makinde had with the president of the AfDB.
Well, as you can see, our guest is Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, who is the president of the African Development Bank Group. Thanks for joining us this
Thank you very much. It's good to see you, Ayo.
Yeah, let's begin with, well, I can't call it an elephant in the room. You're almost 10 years in office now.
Right.
So having been president of the AfDB since 2015. How's it been for you? What are the things that you can see you have? How do you feel? How does that feel? Let's begin from there.
Well, first and foremost, thanks for doing the interview, and thanks for all the great work that you do, and also channels, which I appreciate very much. It's when I was elected president of the bank in 2015, of course, with huge amount of support from President Jonathan, who nominated me, and it's a sign of real confidence. And President Buhari, who was just coming in at the time, so it wasn't obvious that having been nominated by President Jonathan, the new president was coming in, my candidacy was in doubt, unless the new president actually supported me. But I'm very, very grateful because President Jonathan nominated me. His Excellency President Buhari strongly supported my nomination. And of course, we campaigned very hard with my dear sister, former Minister Ngozi of Finance, with the full support of all the heads of state in the country, from Vice President Atiku, from former head of state Abubakar, former head of state President Obasanjo, Vice President Amadi Sambo, and of course General Babangida. So pretty much I had support from everywhere. And the reason why I'm saying that is I'm always somebody who recognizes that you don't make yourself, people make you, they support you. So I recognize I wasn't going there by myself. I was representing the collective of a nation. And I carried that with pride all the time, that I knew that I was going to do that. So we came to the bank, 10 years ago, and it was wonderful. The first thing that I told the staff of the bank and the board of the bank was, look, this is not a job. I don't have a job. I have a mission. I couldn't think of anything more important than to be given the resources, the responsibility, the platform to actually advocate for and actually go transform the continent of my birth. And so it's not a job, it's a mission. I breathe it every single day. And the first thing that I did was to make sure that we could actually accelerate, fast track Africa's development. And so I started off with my staff with a vision, clear vision, called High Fives. Light up and power Africa, feed Africa, industrialize Africa, integrate Africa, and improve the quality of life of the people of Africa. It sounds pretty simple, but it was very, very comprehensive in the sense that I was quite delighted that the United Nations Development Program did their own independent assessment very early of these high fives. And what they found, they said if Africa achieves these high fives, it will have achieved 90% of the Sustainable Development Goals. So we looked at it to fast track Africa. When I look back today, after 10 years, what have we achieved? Huge. All these high fives in the last 10 years have impacted on more than 515 million people. It includes connecting 25 million people to electricity, having 101 million people pulled out of food insecurity, having 121 million people with access to improved transport services, having 127 million people with improved access to health services, improved health services. You got 64 million people with access to water, 38 million people with access to sanitation. And when you look at the digital economy in which we are today, over 48 million people with access to, digital services, And so I feel tremendously proud of the work that we have done and the impact that we've had. But on the bank itself, when I was elected, the capital of the bank was $93 billion. Today, the capital of the bank is $318 billion. So you can imagine, we're a global bank today. The bank 3 years ago was ranked as the best multilateral financial institution in the world. And, 2 years ago, we were ranked as the most transparent financial institution in the world. In fact, we got it 2 years in a row. Last year, there's something called Public Worship Fund, which is the index for global aid transparency. We scored 98.9% in it, which is the highest ever in the history of the index. I feel tremendously that the bank has achieved so much. We are respected. We've maintained our AAA global credit ratings at the bank. And we've continued to be respected everywhere. But more than that, I feel that we have impacted the lives of people around the continent. I feel so proud of the work that we've done, and I'm grateful for all the trust and support that I've been given.
The one that touches me more or most would be the impact on the people.
Yes.
Hundreds of millions of people all over, the world. And there's a saying where you come from, that once you take out hunger, you've significantly reduced poverty. And one wonders how, over the years, we've been struggling with food insecurity in the country. Not too long ago, a few days ago, we heard that the governor of Borno State was talking about the fact that the state is losing ground to insecurity. I spoke with a young farmer, one of the people partnering with your organization on the SAPZ, and was talking about the impact of insecurity on food production, on value addition and all of those things. With food insecurity as bad as it's that we've been grappling with it for decades, from your experience, what are the key challenges and how do we navigate them?
Well, I was minister here, for 4 years, and I was so honored to have been honor of my life to serve my country in that particular role. No, we did all the things that were the right things that would respond to your question. And the first, whenever you're looking at food insecurity, is to accept that the abnormal should not be normal. So, which is that you cannot have so much land and then become a food-dependent country. That is an abnormal thing to have. And so my principle in doing anything that I do in my life is I look at what are the things that I don't like, that I hate, and I just do the opposite. It doesn't have any econometric model to it. I don't think it's acceptable to have so much land, so much cheap labor, right? So much people depending on agriculture, and we are importing food. We should be actually not only producing the food, but exporting the food. And so when I was Minister of Agriculture here, I realized that was the case, and that I knew that we could not sustain that fiscally. There's just no way that we will continue to import food. And so we launched a major program, as you know, that transformed the agriculture in this country, from rice, all the rice revolution that you saw, the wheat production that you saw, the work that we did in making sure that we can grow a lot of tuber crops in cassava, for example. Many people, at that time, I worked very hard on this cassava bread thing, and people were actually thinking there's some kind of bread called cassava. What we're trying to do is just to make sure that you can use cassava flour to be a composite flour that you will mix with wheat flour. Today, you buy any bread that you have in this country today, just look at the packaging. You see something there called white flour. There's nothing called white flour. There's no green flour. There's no blue flour. That's high quality cassava flour right there. We've mainstreamed that into the supply chains, and that is why you can afford bread today, despite the fact that Naira has been devalued. So, point I'm trying to say with that is that you have to grow local, consume local, to be able to create markets, massive markets for your own people. Now, one of the things that is also very important in agriculture is simply access to technologies. If farmers have access to technologies, they can feed us. There's no difference. The farmers that produce rice and all these things around the world, from China to Indonesia, Malaysia, but also to Thailand, are smallholder farmers. And that's what we did here. With an electronic wallet system, we reached farmers with subsidized seeds and fertilizers, 15 million farmers. Today, if you look at a case, just taking it out of Nigeria, you take the case of Ethiopia from the African Development Bank. We take the same model that I use here to Ethiopia. We provided the farmers, the country, with access to heat-tolerant wheat varieties, right? Varieties of wheat that is a temperate crop, but it can grow under hot environments. We provided it to them. You know what they did? In 2018, they grew it on just 5,000 hectares. Last year, total wheat area cultivated was 2.2 million hectares. They grew these new varieties on over 650,000 hectares. And in less than 4 years, they became self-sufficient in wheat. So the point is, you need to have the policy, right, the political will to get out of food dependency, technology, access to finance for your farmers, access to infrastructure for your farmers. And of course, you have to also make sure that you make sure your farmers are supported by agribusinesses that can allow them to have processing and value adding to everything that they produce.
The challenge there, Dr. Adesina, is not these lofty ideals that you set up and which has significantly been sustained. The challenge here is insecurity fomented by those who don't want all these things to happen.
Yeah.
We have a situation, I'm sure you know, where farmers have to pay to harvest their own crops. That's the challenge.
I agree with you, because, there's nothing you can do about agriculture if you can't go to the farm, right? And so security is important, but we have to also understand some of the drivers of insecurity. Insecurity doesn't just happen overnight. Some of those critical drivers for me, and I've had this since I was actually minister, is that we're witnessing a high level of structural poverty in rural areas. a high level of unemployment of young people, right? Many of those in rural areas. And we just create a lot of people that you know, an idle hand is a devil's workshop. And so that poverty and that high level of unemployment of young people has been a challenge. And of course, thirdly, you find a situation where vast areas, in the case of Nigeria that you're talking about, have been affected by climate change. You take the whole of the Lake Chad Basin area of Nigeria, used to be 25,800 kilometers square of area, vast areas of slush. You have areas for grazing, areas for for fisheries area that, you know, farmers could do a lot of things. Young people are employed. Today, it's less than about 2,500 kilometer area. So it's a combination of climate change, a combination of structural poverty and lack of joblessness that has created this insecurity. So I just want you to know that, if you slaughter a cow or a goat or a ram or something, and you have blood on the floor, and you have flies that are coming to it, right? You can take your fly swat and keep hitting it, all the flies off. That's one model, but they're never going to stop because they keep coming back until you wash the source of the problem, which is the blood, off the ground, and the flies will disappear. And so what I'm saying is that the approach to doing it, yes, you need security, but it's not just Nigeria, by the way. I see this in several other countries, that we have to attack the drivers of insecurity. There's something that I call a disaster triangle. And I gave it this name because everywhere you find this triangle, you find conflicts. You have insecurity, which leads to the kind of things you have. And first and foremost is, climate and environmental degradation. And second is the fact that you have high level of unemployment by young people, and you have high level of poverty. Whether it's in northern Nigeria, whether it's in the Horn of Africa, whether it's in the Sahel, it's the same situation. So our work at the African Development Bank has always been to continue to work for what can actually create opportunities for young people. You have to create opportunities for young people. You have to revive the rural areas. And agriculture that you were saying, Ayo, is the key for it. If you don't use agriculture to revive your rural economy, 75% of the people are living there. How are you going to solve the problem? Now let's go to comes back to. That's why I'm always very passionate about agriculture. It's beyond food. It's part of structural transformation of economies.
That fact is not lost on me. Yes. I mean, you've practically lived that all of your life, professionally. But the interesting one here is, of course, the SAPZ, the Special Agro-Industrial Processing Zones. Some of my colleagues have already made me an ambassador of sorts of that because I'm always talking about it. And the reason is the promise that it has. Now, just 2 days back, you were part of the groundbreaking for the venture in Kaduna State. Now, it's been hailed as transformative. For you, I'd like you to speak to, in as few words as possible, the immediate impact, what some will call the low-hanging fruits for the SAPZs within the shortest possible time. Mm-hmm. The intermediate, the medium-term expectations, and the long-term. What are the aspirations of the SAPZs, and where is it going in the next 10, 15, 20, maybe even 50 years?
Basically, I'm so delighted that we're actually launching these special agro-industrial processing zones in Nigeria. This is a vision I had a long time ago when I was Minister of Agriculture. And why? First is that farmers need to have markets. And, when you actually have special agro-industrial processing zones, what you're really doing is you're bringing the food and agribusinesses closer to the rural areas where they actually produce. And so therefore, you're not going to be losing most of your products. Secondly, farmers are going to have markets there. You'll be able to stabilize the prices. And also because of the enabling infrastructure that you can have there, a value chain for processing tomato to paste, whatever, it will develop. And that you can not only support packaged foods to be competitive domestically, you can also support exports of food in the region. Of course, it will create huge amount of jobs, all across. And in fact, for the states that are participating in it, because you are essentially transforming your rural economy from zones of economic misery to new zones of economic prosperity because of what you're bringing there. It means you can also expand the fiscal space for the states that are involved. So there's a whole range of opportunities that you have there. Let me just anchor it on a concrete example of one thing that we supported in Benin Republic, just across there. It's a place called Glojobe. Benin used to export a lot of their cashew raw to Thailand and all of that. Today, Benin, 100% of all their cashew nuts processed there, so which means they earn 10 times more from their cashew nuts than what they were actually exporting. Take the whole issue of cotton. They're one of the largest producers of cotton, right? And so now they have massive companies that are actually processing that cotton into textile, into garments, ISO towels, ISO all kind of things they're supplying all around the world. So they are making more value. So these special agro-industrial processing zones is basically to help you to take what you have and allow you to be able to build value chains locally, regionally, and globally that will allow you to earn a lot more money from it. So I'm really delighted with the one that we are doing in Nigeria. We've committed $538 million to Nigeria. We have 8 states who are there in Kaduna. We are going to be in Cross River. We have, Kano, Katsina. We have Kaduna. We have Cross River. We have Imo. We have Oyo. We have Ogun State in the first set of countries together with the Islamic Development Bank and the International Fund for Agricultural Development. And we're moving into the second phase of it because I really wanted to cover the whole of Nigeria, right? And so the second phase of it will be 28 states. And that includes, by the way, the Federal Capital Territory. So you will have all these things all across the country so that you can actually begin to take what you have and turn it into money.
How does it address the problem of insecurity that has stalled food production in the country over time?
Well, take, for example, when you have all of these zones, you will be creating massive amount of jobs, right? Because a lot of people that actually went into the criminal economy, as I was explaining to you earlier, it's joblessness. If people don't have jobs and then they turn the criminal economy into a job, that's not the economy that you want. But you have to realize that unless and until you deal with this issue of high level of poverty structurally and a high level of unemployment by young people, many of them in the rural areas, we're not going to get out of that. And so these zones will bring hope, a new lease of life. They bring economic opportunities for the farmers, for the small and medium-sized enterprises, for the young people. You will see in every local government that you have this different economies developing based on agriculture. Look, I remember talking of insecurity when I was minister here, and we had all this massive work on agriculture across the country. There was one of the senators that came into one of the meetings at the National Assembly, and he said in his state, I won't mention the state, he said his state used to be the #1 supplier of Megad, which is night guards, in Abuja and in Lagos. He said, but because of the massive agricultural transformation we had, the young people are busy all day throughout the year. And so you got to keep people engaged productively and efficiently. So I expect that a lot of jobs are going to be done. These special agro-industrial processing zones will have, we estimate, hundreds of thousands of jobs in any of these areas, direct jobs and indirect jobs from the linkages that you will have. So I expect that they will basically, as I said, change rural economies from zones of economic misery, which many of them are today, and give them new hope of economic prosperity.
Forgive me for sounding like a prophet of doom with this question. You are aware that many ambitious projects in the country face challenges due to changing political governments, one party today, another party tomorrow. And even in the same political party, we've had situations where the new government shuts down a project, an amazing initiative, spent public money on, and then it shuts it down because I don't like the way the fellow smiles. So what in your opinion, what measures are in place to ensure the sustainability of this SAPZ's, initiative, regardless of political vagaries, shifts, whatever?
I think it's an excellent point. One of the things that we've done is that, first, we've talked to the government very well. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has made the development of these special agro-industrial processing zones a presidential initiative. So which means you have strong political will that is needed to continue to carry that. And so I think I'm very delighted with his leadership on that. The second one is that for this to work, I was a minister, so I know the intra-ministerial tough fights that often happens between Ministry of Trade and Investment and Industry, between finance, between agriculture, between livestock, between fishery, between water. Everybody's trying to adjust for space. And I suffered under that before because I knew that when I was a minister. But we've been able to work to make sure that all the line ministries are working together collaboratively so that everybody sees it as a national strategic project. Because when the government says it wants to expand non-oil revenue, how do you expand non-oil revenue unless you have structural transformation of agriculture and you turn it into a mega business for yourself? So that is important. Third is the codification in law. I really believe many of the initiatives that we have, like the electronic wallet system that I developed when I was here, that actually reached 15 million farmers, and it was discontinued because of exactly what you said. As Governor Uba said, Sani in Kaduna, that if this had been continued, it will have actually continued to transform this country. So the point I want to make is that these great things need to be codified in law. So there has to be an act in National Assembly to institutionalize these things, because investors, it's like a pigeon. You do like this, they're gone, right? So you cannot afford to have policy discontinuity or policy somersault. So that is important. Finally, the coordination cost, right? You're going to have 36 of this plus Federal Capital Territory. And I have advised the government that it's very important to set up a special agro-industrial processing zone authority that will coordinate all of these special agro-industrial zones and making sure you're getting the right policies, the right incentives. You're having one-stop shop in terms of, people are going to be coming from around the world setting up factories. So it makes it easier for them from Nigeria Customs, Immigration Service, the National Inland Revenue Service, and all of that to streamline things to make it easier for them. So, and at the end of the day, I think what I would also like to add is the great connection between the state government and the federal government. In fact, all these states that I mentioned and all more, we've been working very well to make sure that there's a synchrony between federal and state. So when you have all of this and you codify in law, I think that actually ensures that there will not be policy somersaults because things that are set in law.
You don't think that NEPSA, National Nigerian Export Processing Zones Authority, can mediate this initiative as opposed to setting up another?
When I was minister, we actually had that discussion. They're doing a great job, but the export processing zone is actually where you bring in duty-free stuff and you bring in raw materials, you process it within those zones for export. That's what those things are meant to do, right? And the special agro-industrial processing zones are actually very different. You're locating them in rural economies, right? And they are to produce and to buy produce from rural areas in the agricultural sector, process and add value to it in your domestic market, right? And they have to be coordinated because you have so many, you're not importing stuff. You have to make sure the farmers have access to seed and fertilizers, there's irrigation, there's infrastructure, there's storage. You got to make sure the companies that are coming to those rural areas, these new zones, have to have the incentives to do it, the power they need, the infrastructure they need to process, add value, so that you can have Nigeria producing a lot of packaged food. So very different, I think, completely from the, but NEPSA was there. And I think that, what I'm very delighted with is that the Minister of Industry was there, the Minister of Agriculture was there. And when I gave my speech, I said to them, look, let's don't have institutional talks, because I suffered under that when I was minister. And I was very glad when I finished my speech and they told me, no, we don't have that and we're going to work collaboratively. That is important. And I think everybody should always recognize that we're in government, whatever you find yourself, for a short period of time, but you have a duty and a responsibility to do the right things that will structurally transform this economy to continue to boom in the future. So personal ego is not part of the strategy.
Well, now that you talk about collaboration, between interministerial collaboration, you've also spoken about a strong partnership between the federal government and the states. we know also that it's the states that guarantee the loans, where the states collect the loans from this multilateral organization that your organization has, put together. But the states are the ones who own the loan. However, these zones are going to be in local governments, and they are going to be in rural communities. That's the turf of local governments. You don't see another territorial turf war coming up.
Not at all. Why should there be? Because it is the role of the state to sign. The state signs subsidiary loan agreements with the federal government through the Ministry of Finance, and that's how we are able to do all this. The states work with their local governments to select which areas that they're going to do. All the local governments are involved, so it's not as if this has been done to. No. In fact, it is better for the local governments because they will have great infrastructure. They will have lots of agribusiness companies located in their areas. They will have energy. They will have jobs. They will have a fiscal space that is bigger than they ever thought possible, because you're building a structure of wealth for them that they would not have had. A strategy of development is not to beg for money from the federal government. I know all the states have their allocations from FARC and so on, but I don't think you're going to develop states just by FARC allocations. You've got to have states that are able to really be economically independent and viable, through industries, right, on their own, right? And so if you and I run a company, it is not the subsidiary, it is not the group company that is constantly subsidizing the subsidiary companies. That's a failed business. But if you want to run a great business, it's the subsidiary companies that actually thrive and get more money to support the group. And it's the same way. So it's while you have fiscal decentralization, but coming out of allowing the states the space together with federal government to turn the assets they have into great income opportunities and revenue earning opportunities for themselves. If the states are stable, if the states have a lot of revenue, the local governments are also expanding their fiscal space. That's good for everybody.
Well, I have a question for you about, the balance of government, of politically motivated decisions and sound economic policies. But before I get to that, there is this initiative, this part of the elements of the SAPZ is it's government-enabled, private sector-driven. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Please explain that, because people, I don't know how many people really know, particularly in the rural communities, what that means. How that one government is not going to say, no, we're not done yet. We're not giving it to you, private sector people yet. How does that really work when it says government enabled and it's private sector driven, in a way that the government will not get in the way of the development that is intended?
In fact, in this case, government is the enabler. Because without the government, this wouldn't happen. So, for example, if you take a look at how it's done, the government gives the land, right? The government gives the title to the land, to the zone. The government guarantees the security for those that are actually going to be in those zones. The government facilitates all the services that are going to be within those zones, from immigration to customs to tax. The government gives all the incentives to everybody. And in some cases, the government may even have to guarantee access to finance to some of the SMEs that are going to be linked to that zone. So those are the roles that government plays there. The role of private sector is not to substitute for government public goods infrastructure. So they come into an area that has been enabled, and it's a plug and play. So the private sector is easier for them because their cost of establishment is already low. They are actually in an area that has great infrastructure, right? And so they basically set up their own companies, the vertical companies that are there, And so it's a PPP, it's a public-private partnership. And I don't think anybody can play politics with business, because, look, you're trying to expand opportunities to create jobs, to expand your fiscal space. The private sector is the engine of growth. And so the role of government is not to discourage private sector. The role of government should be to continue to expand opportunities for the private sector. So I actually think in this particular case, it's working out very, very well between the government and the private sector.
Okay, I have two more questions. In your view, that issue that I raised about politically motivated decisions and as opposed to sound economic policies that support long-term developments. How can we strike that balance?
Well, you know, the thing is, you have to always think structurally for economies, right? So if you want your economies to grow, you have to figure out, you know, what are the critical things you have to do. You need to have strong macroeconomic framework, because that is what determines a lot of the things that drive your economy. It determines your exchange rate, it determines your interest rate, it determines the interest rate that exchange your interest rate, and therefore your competitiveness in ability to borrow money, ability to be competitive, and all of that. So there's no substitute for sound macroeconomic policy. I think that is one. So you can't play politics with it. That's what I'm saying. It's like going to an hospital. There are basic things you must have, and that's one of it. And second is vision. You know, people move when there is a vision. So when government set the right vision and the government gives the right incentives to push that particular vision, whether it's providing energy, whether it's driving agriculture, whether it's supporting small and medium-sized enterprises, or whether it's setting up private equity funds that will support young people, you know, people move based on the vision that you have. But look, you cannot plan too much, let's say 30, 40 years. I hear people always telling me, you know, as I travel, well, we want to have a 50-year vision. Well, I don't need a 50-year vision. You know, if you're actually doing a puzzle, right, you check your puzzle and you look at all the pieces of the puzzle, right, you know exactly what you want. It's in your mind. And so when you pick all the pieces, you know exactly where those pieces fit. So I've always said, it's not about a 30-year vision. It's not about your 50, 40-year vision. What am I going to do with that? It's about building the component pieces of a puzzle with a vision and knowing that, okay, if I put this puzzle there, I get that side right. I get this one right. I get this one right. Eventually, when you put them together, they lock in. So we should be actually focusing on that. So let me be clear. First and foremost, one of the key puzzles is electricity. Without electricity, you can do absolutely nothing, right? And so we must get electricity provision right. And that's why myself and Ajay Banga, the president of the World Bank, got together. You know, we've been supporting electricity. I just told you 25 million people with access to electricity, but I got to make sure 600 million people have access to electricity in Africa. You know, we got together and launched what's called the Mission 300, where we brought together more than 27 heads of state and government and over 78 ministers of finance and energy and so on. The goal is to connect 300 million people to electricity by 2030. And the African Development Bank on our own, we also have a program, $20 billion program called Desert to Power, taking all of the sunlight that we have across the 11 countries of the Sahel, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, all the way to Eritrea, all the way to northern Ethiopia, and turn the electricity that God has given us, the sunlight, into electricity for ourselves. That alone from the bank, African Development Bank, will provide electricity for 250 million people. So if you take the Mission 300 and you take the Desert to Power initiative, we will have roughly about 550 million people with access to electricity. So this is a critical piece. Another critical piece is agriculture, is food that you're talking about. Another critical piece is making sure that you have infrastructure, port, rail, digital infrastructure that you need to be able to be competitive, you know, in everything that you do. A key part of that is also to have your infrastructure. It's the mental infrastructure, it's the brain infrastructure, the skills and the capacities that you need to innovate and be competitive in the labor markets of today. So all I'm saying is, I'm not one that will say, I need a 50-year strategy. I don't need a 50-year strategy. I just need to be sure that the component pieces that we put together as part of a puzzle are the ones you're working on. And when another government comes in, you know, and that government puts those pieces together, they will fit. And so let's just make sure that we are working on the individual pieces and not things too far into the future. I don't believe, I always say that, you know, for people, you have to have a high discount rate. You have to bring things of the future to now very fast.
Talking about that, by the way, when you spoke about you and I doing business, I'm looking forward to that. You talked about vision quite frequently.
Yeah.
You've spoken to young people in Nigeria before now, and it looks even more bleak now than ever before. You know about the Japa syndrome. Everybody just wants to go to a place where the opportunity is. What would be your word to young people as you exit AfDB as president?
You know, if there's something that actually makes me quite sad, is this part of it, which is the situation where we find high level unemployment for young people. And I do not believe that the future of our young people lies in Europe. It doesn't lie in America. It doesn't lie in Canada. It doesn't lie in Japan or China or anywhere else, or Latin America for that matter. It should lie in Africa growing well, growing robustly, growing inclusively, and able to create quality jobs for our young people. Look, I don't subscribe to what some people say that population in Africa is a problem. It's not a problem. Why is that population not a problem for India? Why is that population not a problem for China? It's what you do with your population, how you skill them up. And that population, if you skill them up and they have good jobs and social protection for your population, and that population has high purchasing power, that becomes your domestic demand for everything that you do. So in the world that we're in today with tariffs and so on, so when you actually build consumption as a huge part of your GDP, that's what you do for it. Now, in the case of young people, I go around, it's the Japa syndrome that you mentioned. It's a big loss for us out of Nigeria and many other countries. And what we've got to do about this will be as follows, and we are doing something about it. First and foremost, is to recognize that young people don't need freebies. We don't need people just saying, oh, well, I just want to give you a youth empowerment program. What does that mean? I go around Africa, people tell me all that, oh, we have a youth empowerment program. So what exactly is it? Youth don't need that kind of empowerment, freebie, little things you are throwing to them. They have skills, they have knowledge, they have entrepreneurship capacity. They want to turn their ideas into great businesses. And so what the young people need, it's not those so-called empowerment programs. They need capital. They need you to put your money at risk on their behalf. Look, I'm a banker. You walk into the bank, and you see young people. A young person, 21 years old, comes into the bank. You ask them in your risk assessment, the only thing you see is risk. And so you go ask them for securities that they need to bring to you. You have a house, you have a land, you have this, you have tax for the last 40 years. I'm only 21 years old, And so the whole of the system is not designed, is what I'm saying, for young people. The commercial banking system, the financial system has failed young people in Africa. We have over 465 million young people. You're getting them between the age of 15 and 35 that you are adding. Where's the financial markets for them? Why is that suddenly a surprise to us that they are leaving? It's because you're not putting anything there for them, And so we must recognize that the young people are our biggest assets. Demographic asset has to become an economic asset. And to do that, you have to put capital. That's why actually, at the African Development Bank, I led my team to develop what's called the Youth Entrepreneurship Investment Banks. These are new financial institutions across Africa that do nothing but just support the businesses of young people. And they are not cash, they are not deposit-taking banks, they're investment banks that will allow them to have business support facilities. They will be able to develop their business plans. They will have technical assistance. They will have debt and equity as their businesses grow. Look, Zuckerberg and all those people wouldn't be who Bill Gates, they won't be who they are unless there are financial institutions around them. So I really believe that we have to address that market and institutional failure, and that's what we are doing. These banks, for example, we just approved $100 million to set up the Nigerian Youth Entrepreneurship Investment Bank. That Nigerian Youth Entrepreneurship Investment Bank will mobilize $2 billion of investment for more than 38,000 businesses of young people in Africa. And that's why at the African Development Bank, we also, together with Agence Française de Développement, Islamic Development Bank, and others, have a $614 million program called IDICE. It's an initiative for the development of support for creative enterprises and digital enterprises in Nigeria. What will that do? That will support almost 300 small and medium-sized businesses of young people in digital and creative enterprises, and probably create about 6 million jobs and add about $6.4 billion to Nigeria's economy. So my point is this: you cannot turn your demographic asset into somebody else's problem, right? We have to own that as something that is ours. We have to put our money behind our young people and create opportunities for them, right? Enough of they don't need 5,000 naira, 10,000 naira. You want to create youth-based wealth. Look, if you don't, in the future, as you have a rapidly aging population, you have a youth population. Africa has the highest youth population in the world. Who are the people going to pay the taxes in the future? Where are you going to get the domestic capital mobilization in the future? It's the same demographic, but you have to therefore invest in it now, and so you can actually reap that in the future. That's how we're dealing with that. I think the other thing I would say, just lastly on that one, is just issue of skills. Give people the right skills that they need. So that they can actually turn their ideas into real business. It's not just about looking for jobs. Most people want to set their own businesses. Africa has the highest level of entrepreneurship in the world, but they deserve and they need capital to turn those ideas into real viable and competitive businesses.
Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Dr. Akinwumi Adesina is the president of the African Development Bank. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate your time too.
So can you tell us some of your own takeaways from that interview? What an interview, creating youth-based wealth, and the very fact that Dr. Akinwumi Adesina sees his job as a mission. I think it challenges all of us to ask that question, what is your mission? Well, that's our program this beautiful Thursday morning on Sunrise Daily. Thank you so much for being a part of it. I'm Maupe Ogun Yusuf.
And I'm Kayla Megwa. Have a great day ahead.